Next, we are moving on to the school board, yeah, finance committees. It's the finance committee's budget. I'm going to turn to you, Ann, and then you can.
So we have, that last week, Superintendent Bozana presented us the budget, and it was referred to the finance committee. So we've had one meeting yesterday at the finance committee level to review the budget, and we also had our public hearing. And at this point, we have a presentation for the joint. Do we have 2 meetings? We have 2. Okay, yeah. Thursday and then Tuesday. And Tuesday was our public hearing. So tonight we have a presentation from Alicia and Javier, and then we can take some questions.
Great. Yeah, so just quickly, our agenda for today is that we obviously already introductions, we're doing the agenda review, and then what we're going to do is we're going to walk through the proposed budget first, so talking about everything, so what the totals are and both expenditures and revenue, the drivers for any of the increases that you see there, and finally, obviously, tax impact. And Alicia is going to be doing that, and then I'm going to walk you through the proposed investments, the major new programs and services that are built into the budget that you're going to see, and talk a little bit about the why and the specifics of it without trying to get super granular, but obviously ready to do that if you have those levels of questions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to.
Okay, so we're going to talk about expenditures first, then any revenues, obviously not including property taxes, and then sort of the impact of the tax rate. So, the superintendent's 2020 recommended budget calls for a total spending of $117.8 million. It's an increase of $7.2 million, or 6.5% over last year's spending. Of that $7.2 million, approximately 2.6 or 2.2% of the total budget is for new investments in the Portland campus. So existing salaries and benefits make up about 77% of the overall budget at just over $90 million. Contracted services, which includes a variety of budget items such as professional services, employee training, and professional development. Repair, maintenance, and facilities costs makes up 8.7% of the overall budget at $10.3 million. Supplies include supplies for all schools and departments, food supplies, utility costs, and technology supplies. This budget category makes up 3.8% of our overall budget, $4.5 million. The other expenses category is relatively small at only $800,000 and includes items such as field trip transportation, dues and fees, and contingency funds. This represents only 0.7% of the total. And then finally, debt service is our final category, which is just over $8.8 million for FY 2020. This includes the first year of debt payments for the Lysette School renovation of just over $1 million. So we're going to talk about the expenditures in chunks, and first I want to talk about salaries. So the proposed salary budget is $71.4 million. It includes professional salaries, instructional aides, administrators in the school buildings and a central office, and support staff throughout school and departments. It also includes temporary salaries for adult ed teachers, substitute costs, teacher additional pay, stipends and differentials, and retirement sick payouts. This is an increase of $4.1 million, or 6.12% over FY 2019. Included in this total is approximately $2.2 million in new salaries and benefits for Portland Promise Investments. As noted in this slide, this also includes a proposal to reduce 5 elementary school teachers based on projected enrollment for the 2019-2020 school year.
Alicia, can I ask, not
Yes.
a question, but for the public who's maybe watching, stipends and differentials, could you just explain briefly so people know what?
So those are items like if a teacher is acting as a mentor for an after-school group, or a coach, or an athletic coach, or a variety of other things. There's if a person is a teacher leader in a school, they would receive a stipend for additional time spent outside of their regular day. So it's that sort of extra pay over and above.
Thank you.
So our benefits budget is increasing just under $1.5 million for a total of 21.5 million. It's an increase of 7.3%. So we budget this based on how the state of Maine requires us to account for these things. So the flexible benefits category actually includes a lot of different benefits. It includes health and dental insurance, Medicare, and long-term disability costs. So we budgeted an 8% increase in health insurance and a 5% increase in our dental insurance. However, the district is not responsible for an increase above 3% for the teachers and administrators per their union contract. So, and then Medicare and long-term disability are variable, obviously depending on salary increases. We chose to reduce unemployment compensation by $30,000 this year, based on the usage over the past several years. Our retirement budget is up about $300,000 or 9%. A portion of this increase is variable due to an increase on the salary side. However, there's an increase of 4.8% in the amount that the Portland Public Schools contributes towards the Maine Public Employees Retirement System for the teacher plan, which went from Portland contributing 3.97% to 4.16%. And the people included in that plan are actually a majority of our school employees, so it's all teachers, all ed techs, all school-based administrators, and many central office-based administrators. And then finally, we continue to see a reduction in workers' compensation insurance, and our life insurance remains the same as last year. So,
Just a question before we move on.
Yeah.
So, on the salaries, on the increase, you said that 2.2 million was in new salaries.
yes.
What's the new benefits associated?
Probably 20% of the salary number, so 440,000.
So out of this 1.46 million, you
Yeah,
think it's
so last
about-
year, I don't know if people recall, but we actually had a double kind of step for health insurance. We had not budgeted enough the year before, and then we saw a large increase that year. So last year it was a lot. So even though, I mean, I'm not saying 1.4 million is not a lot of money, but it's not anywhere near what it was last year. The entire benefits budget, I think last year was like over 10%. So.
Counselor, would it be helpful if school department could put together a brief memo just outlining that, and that would have it for the record?
That would be great. Thank you.
Just real quick, do we want to wait till the end to do all questions, sort of gathering up, or I can dive?
Sure.
I've got a few, I don't want to
I
miss a
can hold
page.
them too.
I'm either
Sorry.
way.
I think, I mean, I defer to you, but I think if we can, unless it's a clarification, if we can wait, that'll allow you to get through the presentation. I know you're nimble at this, and I'm sure the school board barrages you with questions during it.
I've got 17 on page 2.
So we're going to move into debt service because it's one of our larger increases. So our debt budget is at $544,000, or 6.8 over FY19. These are figures that are provided to us annually by the City of Portland, as they are responsible for issuing and managing repayment of all debt. We just budget what they tell us to budget. A significant amount of debt rolled off between 2019 and 2020. So just as a reminder, we added $1 million to our debt budget this year. So about 450 rolled off last year.
And one thing I want to mention on that is, I believe the LICIF bids open, is it tomorrow?
You know, August, April, February.
April.
I was like, August.
So just, you know, we all
Looking forward to
know,
this budget being done.
we all know how construction costs are going. And if by chance, those bids come in incredibly high, I think that will cause us to give pause on issuing that debt, because we won't have a contract. We probably want to award the contract at a significantly higher amount. It would, so that amount of debt service might change if we don't award the bid based on that date. So,
So this includes a projected amount of debt service on LICIF.
right.
I assume based on the architect's recommendation.
Yeah.
Their estimate, which is 12-point-something million of debt.
Okay, so
And
the
just
rest.
so everyone's
Sorry.
clear, to follow up what I whispered to Brendan, I think they were going to be open tomorrow, and the school department asked for an extension, so now we'll be in on the 8th.
And we asked for the extension because the contractors asked for additional time to be able to respond to the RFP.
So they're all on the same.
So this is sort of every other category, and I'm just going to go through a few notable increases in this section. So an increase of $250,000 in tuition to private sources, which covers outplacement of special education students. In the past for us, we've carried money over every year in this budget item. And this year, we are going to be very close to spending all of it. So special ed has added costs for next year because they're finding they're placing more students in these private places.
So,
Yes.
just clarification on what
Yes.
you just said, that the carryover is usually from prior years. You're anticipating that increase will be pretty close to what you're.
Correct,
projecting.
what we think we're gonna spend.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure I understood what you said.
Yes. So, we're gonna talk about investments a little later, but I do wanna call out, there's $92,500 to cover a new lease for computers for all K through 6 staff. They are not covered through the MLTI program through the state, and I believe the last time they were refreshed was 5 or 6 years ago. There's $114,000 in professional development and $117,000 in educational supplies for the core instruction investment. We have $50,000 in natural gas increases, $60,000 in gasoline increases, an increase of $193,000 in repairs and maintenance throughout the district. $50,000 of that is added for building renovations for our movement of our BREATHE program out of central office into another location. About $75,000 of that is for our bus maintenance of our buses. We're finding that we're spending a lot of money on repair and maintenance right now. We have an additional $25,000 to the city for athletic field maintenance. We had deferred that cost last year, so we've added it back in for the upcoming year. And then we have a planned increase of our outside contracts for mowing and plowing. And then we have a $50,000 increase in the rental costs of the cathedral building for Portland Adult Ed. And that's due to some planned upgrades at the building that are going to be covered through an increased rent amount. So this portion of the budget is up just about $1 million or 7.28%, and what we just went through is just about $1 million. So the expenditure summary total shows you here the total increase of 7.2 million is made up of an increase in 4.6 million in existing staffing, programming, and contracts, and 2.6 million in new investments. So we're going to transition into the revenue budget now. So before we get into revenue totals, I think it's important to understand how the education budget is funded. Obviously, the people at this table understand how the education budget is funded, but perhaps this is for our audience. So the blue portion of this pie chart, which Javier does not like the pie chart, so I apologize if anyone else does not like pie charts, represents the portion of our budget supported by property taxes. The red amount shows the amount coming from the state of Maine. The green is other general fund revenue. The purple is use of fund balance. The light blue is adult ed revenue, and the orange is food service revenue. So in 2019, the tax levy made up about 80.1% of the overall funding for the budget, as compared to this year, which we're asking for 79.6% of the overall budget. So although we're seeing an increase in our state subsidy revenue, as we'll discuss in a few slides, it still only represents a small portion of our overall budget at 14.1%, as compared to last year where it was 14.8%. And the largest gain was in our other revenue category this year, and it was due to the increased main care reimbursement for the BREATHE program that we'll talk about in a little bit. And we added $100,000 in indirect cost sharing from our federal grant to help offset some of the increases in finance and HR staffing that we had just talked about. So that's a new $100,000 in our budget.
Just a clarification.
Yes.
I'm trying to follow along with all the numbers that you know so well, but I'm hearing for the first time. And I'm not, were those written somewhere?
They're written in my notes, so I can give you a copy of
No,
my
that's
notes.
all right.
No, actually, that would be helpful if you could give us the, you know.
The
just
narrative.
Yeah.
That would be great. I'm trying to
No problem.
listen and write, and I'm listening and then not writing and not catching it all. Thank you.
Okay, so these are our non-tax revenues, and you can see that this year's budget is up $1.5 million or 6.8% over last year. So included in this non-revenue category are tuition paid for out-of-school district students to attend Portland Public Schools, tuition paid to attend adult education programming, daily sales and federal funds for school nutrition, transportation billing to outside groups, building rental fees, gate receipts from athletic events, our state education subsidy, and then our Maine care reimbursement. So all of those things make up the $1.5 million increase. So you might remember this chart from last year. And I think it's just a good visual to explain sort of the change in EPS funding. This is all sort of state funding. So we got $700,000 more this year, but I think it's important to note that yes, it's an increase and we have projected a decrease, so that's a bonus at the very beginning. But we're still down in revenue from 2 years ago, from when we were receiving money from paths sending schools separately. So even though that was included last year, we had talked about how that was sort of a shift in revenue, and we're really still not back to where we were from FY 2018. So this, our state education subsidy, the way they calculate this is based on the number of students, based on obviously the number of teachers we have. It runs through a formula, and our total allocation, which essentially the state says is the minimum amount that we can raise, went up by $1.3 million last year. So part of that, so our second largest revenue source obviously is the state education subsidy. This $700,000 increase represents just 0.6% of the revenue we need to fund the budget for 2020. So the formula hasn't changed a lot. I know last year we spent a lot of time understanding what happened. There was a lot of movement last year, so this year it really hasn't changed. Other than we got more special education funding than we have in the past. It's based on our actual students. We get reimbursement for high cost students. So of this 1.3 million almost $1 million of that was an increase in special ed. And the Portland voters approved the Portland Public Schools joining the Greater Sebago Education Alliance as part of the regionalization efforts encouraged by the DOE in order to offset our loss in system administration funding. So our system administration funding went down again for this year, but we actually received another $96,000 because we are a part of that GSEA regionalization group. So that portion of the revenue is up 104% over last year. So in total, that allocation is up about $1.5 million. When I was putting sort of our projections running through, we anticipated it would only be about $1.5 million, so we were pretty close on the allocation side. But you might recall that we were very worried about what our increase in valuation would do because we knew our state equalized valuation is rising over $266 million this year as compared to the prior year. So, but due to the increase in education funding proposed in the budget, the state was able to reduce the mill rate, which determines the amount to be raised locally depending on our valuation. So our local expectation only increased by $560,000 this year because that mill rate was brought down by 20 cents because more money was put in the formula. So to put this into context, had the mill rate stayed the same as last year, our local expectation would have been up $1.7 million higher. We would have lost $400,000. So in total, the increase in expenditures of $7.2 million less the increase in the non-tax revenue of about $1.5 million calls for a tax levy increase of $5.7 million. This represents an increase of 6.5% over the tax levy. In discussions with Brendan and Chris Huff, they said that we should add $85 million to the valuation over last year. So when we take that into consideration, this is an increase of 60 cents over our tax rate, or 5.4%. So what that means is that 60 cents is an increase of $144 per year on a $240,000 home, which is obviously just our half of the total tax bill, not including whatever happens on the city side. So I'm going to hand it back to Superintendent Tom.
Okay, so I'm going to walk you through the investments that we are proposing to make this year. I want to try to put those in context for you. We passed the Portland Promise in 2017, and during the 2018 budget cycle, we really did not make any specific investments in accomplishing what we set out in the promise. Last year, we had some significant investments that we were able to make in things like building a relationship with students. You'll recall investments in things like extended learning opportunities for our students, things like our Make It Happen program, and so on. So those are some of the investments that we made last year. In social emotional learning, we were able to add our clinical director position, which has helped us with the what I'll talk about when we talk about the BREATHE program in a little bit, and some initial investments in our core instruction. And so that's what we are sort of building on this year. And so you'll see that these are the three priorities that I'm going to talk about: our core instruction priority, our pre-kindergarten expansion priority, and our behavioral health continuum. So those are the three major investments that we are proposing to make this year. So I am going to go through these in detail, but I just wanted to sort of right off the front, sort of summarize this for you, and then we'll come back to this slide at the very end of the presentation so that you can sort of, with sort of the full context of each of those investments, understand what it is that we are proposing. So the first one is our core instruction. Overall, that will have a net impact of $276,000, and that is roughly 3.5 cents of the 60 cents that Alicia just talked about. We will talk about our BREATHE program, which is our behavioral health continuum. That will have a net impact on the budget of $530,000, or about 6.6 cents on the overall tax rate. And then our pre-kindergarten expansion, which is the first installment in getting us to universal pre-kindergarten for 4-year-olds in the city, and that is going to cost $560,000, or about 7 cents of that, 7 of those 60 cents coming from the pre-kindergarten. And then I'll talk about some of these additional investments. Alicia touched on a few of them as she was walking through the increases in the budget, things like our laptop refresh for our elementary school teachers and so on, and that overall will be about 5 cents of the 60. So overall, these investments represent 22 cents of the 60-cent increase to the tax rate. So first, I'm going to walk through, and this will be the same format for all of these. I'm going to go very quickly through what our goal is that the particular investment is tied to. So our first investment that I'm going to talk about, which is our core instruction, is connected to our achievement goal. Our achievement goal is written there, so I'm not going to read that for you. But this is the sort of the centerpiece of what we try to do as a school district. What people think of is a school district that helps students achieve at high levels. The reason that we need to make this investment, this is a lot of information, and I'm not going to walk through it in detail, but you've seen these slides before. As a school district, we do a pretty good job with our students who are middle class and so not economically disadvantaged students. When we compare our performance on state assessments to comparison districts, whether it's other large districts in the state or even whether it's our neighbors in the region, we do a really good job. But when you look at the performance of our economically disadvantaged students, our performance lags significantly with respect to those districts, and that is clearly what we need to be able to address as a school district, and that's why our focus on core instruction is the first thing that we are leading with.
So just to clarify, can you go back? ELA,
ELA is English Language Arts, and this is just an example. It's the same in mathematics as it is in English Language Arts.
okay, so the 69.1% means that that's how many are meeting the standard?
Yeah, the blue is
Who are
our,
non-economic.
our non-economically disadvantaged, and the orange is our economically disadvantaged.
And the goal is the 92% that we saw on the slide?
That's the graduation rate. We're, like, our average is the state average. So on average, our students are, comparable to the state overall. But when you look and you parse out our free and reduced lunch and our non-free and reduced lunch students, that's where you can see the fact that averages hide the truth, which is that we do a great job with our non-economically disadvantaged students, and we actually do better than the state. We do as well as our neighbors. We do, you can see better than most of those comparison districts, with the exception of Bangor. And then when you look at our free and reduced lunch population, we do better than no one other than Lewiston.
I see, so this over here is everybody, so we do better than everybody on everybody average.
That's the gap. That's the size of our
We
gap.
want the short bar. We
You
don't
would
have
want to
it.
have a nice short.
You don't want to be on that side.
Our gap is 38.6%.
And then just one thing to note on math is we have an even smaller percentage of economically disadvantaged students meeting grade standards, so it's about 20%.
The gap is similar
The gap
on
is
both. I just don't want to bombard you with a bunch of slides on, student performance, because really, I think this is not news. It's something that has been, part of our story for a long time, and, definitely part of our story around the Portland Promise and why we are, focused on doing the things that we're trying to do. So briefly on the strategies, these are the strategies that were outlined in the Portland Promise when it was adopted by the board, and the investments that we're making this year are focused specifically on that first strategy, which is ensuring that our curriculum is aligned and that the work that we're asking students to do is reflective of the learning expectations that are what is measured in those assessments that you just shared information. So the things that we're proposing to do advance our work in these areas. They help us to arrive at a clear instructional vision. They aid our ability to have curriculum coherence across our schools and grades. They are focused on building our teachers' capacity through sustained professional development and through teacher leadership. And it also puts us in a place where we are able to, as a district, do our own research and development work so that we can continue to move our agenda forward. The four areas that we're proposing to focus on are math, early literacy and English language arts, science, technology, and engineering, and obviously we separate that from math, even though it's commonly referred to as STEM, because we have a very specific and intense focus on mathematics, and finally around social studies. The overall investment, if you sort of look back to the earlier slide where we summarized these, you'll see that it was a total impact of $276,000. Of that, $44,000 is in additional staff, and the remainder is in things like curriculum materials, professional development, and things along those lines. So most of the investment here is on those things, professional development and curriculum materials and so on. Obviously the school board has seen detailed presentations on all of these with all of the specific investments that go and add up to that $276,000. We don't have that level of detail for you here today, but we'd be happy to provide that if you think that that's helpful to you. So moving on to the second area, it's tied to our whole student goal. The whole student goal is really about, understanding that achievement in content is, you only accomplish that if you're also taking care of the social emotional development of our students. And so that includes everything from skills and habits and mindsets, and their ability to engage with each other and with the world around them in a positive way. The importance of this is well known. I think we all know that as a country we are facing a mental health crisis that is unprecedented, that there has been an increase in the number of students with behavioral disorders. Over the years, the average age of depression has dropped from 29 to 14.5 over the last 40 years, and that 16% of high school students report that they've seriously thought about suicide. And then the research is also very clear that investments such as the ones that we're talking about today are the kind of investments that have the ability to increase pro-social behaviors, improve student attitudes about school, and reduce depression and stress among our students. So that's the why this work is so incredibly important that we are prioritizing making these investments. The Portland Promise has a number of strategies for every one of our goals, and these are the specific strategies for whole student. And the investments that we're proposing fall under those two bolted strategies. So those are the areas where we're focusing our investments. There's no additional cost involved in this piece, but I just want to underscore that this is a process. Last year we made significant investments in building the foundation of our positive behavior interventions and supports, and that is primarily built around helping all of our teachers to have common language and common skills around how to manage the classroom and the students in front of them more efficiently. And that's the underpinning for everything that we do in our behavioral health continuum. But what we're really, the investment portion of what we're proposing to do this year is really tied to what we're calling our BREATHE program. And so this is an effort to ensure that our students who have the most significant dysregulation have the support that they need so that they can actually become productive learners. And so the plan that we're proposing is something that follows what is very commonly used in the special education language, this notion of a continuum from least restrictive to most restrictive. Least restrictive meaning that you are in a regular setting with some additional supports, and the most restrictive is that you are not in a regular classroom setting, you are in a special setting. The most restrictive possible placement is when you're no longer in the school district and you are placed outside of the school district. And you saw, for example, that we have over the past 2 years had an increase in the number of students that wind up in those outside placements. This is an attempt for students, and that can be for a variety of reasons. It's not all because of emotional behavioral disabilities, but it can be for a variety of reasons. But some of them are for emotional behavioral disabilities, and so the BREATHE program is an attempt to strengthen our ability to serve those students in district. So what we are proposing in this area is a very significant investment. And so this is when you look at our overall FTE increase, where the bulk of the FTE increase is coming from this area and from pre-K, which we will talk about next. So 31 FTE positions. This, again, the school board's seen the details around that, and that is a total cost of $1.3 million. There is a significant revenue offset in this particular initiative, so that the total budget impact is still significant. It's $530,000, but that is there is a significant revenue offset for that.
I do want to mention something about the FTE additions. 23 of those are ed tech BHPs. Those are people that are in our schools right now. They are already providing services to kids. They are not our employees.
BHP.
Behavioral health professional. Sorry. So, in many cases, these are outside providers that are coming into our schools, working one-to-one with children, and they are billing Maine Care on their students' behalf. We're paying seed out of our EPS subsidy, so we have a portion of that money that we're not getting withheld. So we are bringing those in as our staff so that we can bill for them the way that outside agencies right now are billing for them. So actually, in many cases, there might be less FTEs in our buildings because those are all one-to-ones right now with outside providers, and that won't necessarily be the case. So it's a large number, and I said to Javier, that's a pretty big number. But these are not new people in the buildings. They're making outside providers for the public schools employees.
Is there any difference in services that they'll provide?
So I think that we should touch on the fact that right now they're specifically associated with a student, and so they can only work with that student. This gives us more flexibility, so they might be assigned primarily to a student, but when a student is in a setting where they don't need that level of support, that person can do other things in the school, so it gives us additional flexibility with the staff. This has been something that for a long time, principals have asked to have, those positions be, to the extent possible, to be district-based positions because of, in essence, they work for us as opposed to working for somebody else.
So it may be a one-for-one swap, but the benefit that we're getting, the district is getting, is greater because there may be other services that those individuals can provide that they can't while they're, or they can't bill while they're consultants.
Gotcha.
And so is some of that net cost taking them on under our salary and our benefit program?
Yes. A significant portion.
So
But we'll also serve more children, we'll serve more students overall, and with this reaching a broader continuum of care. So it's not just the kids who need the most services, like what.
And maybe, can you back up to that other slide, because I sort of went through this fast. So I think that what, the bulk of how this will work is if you think of what we currently have, we have schools where students are assigned to a BHP, and so they have that level of support. And they might be getting some additional support from a social worker in the school. They may be getting some additional support from the special ed resource teacher in the building. But that's their level of support. And when that doesn't work, our only option is to send those students to Bayside, to the Bayside Learning Community. The big investment here is in that middle section, which is our Breathe support program, and that is creating school-level classrooms that will provide an intermediate step for those students who may not just the sort of the one-on-one support or the resource support that they're getting from the special ed teachers at the school is not enough, and they need a more restrictive placement. And so that restrictive placement might be, will be that they're not necessarily in their home school. They're instead in one of the two schools where we will have the Breathe classrooms, and those students will be in those classrooms for whatever portion of the day. If you look at that, it says between 20 and 95% of the day, they will be in those classrooms instead of being in the mainstream with their peers. And then, those students will gradually, as we do our work with them, be able to transition back into their classrooms. There are some students that we will find that intermediate program is not enough, and those students will need to go to the day treatment program, so the next iteration of our Bayside, which is, that will still be necessary, but we envision that overall we'll serve more students, but the number of students that are in that more restricted placement will be smaller than what we currently have. Does that help?
It does. I mean,
Can I add one more thing? Clinically speaking, the quality of care becomes much better when you have PhDs working for the district as opposed to contracted. The plan of care is managed by contracted workers. When they're not present, the communication falls apart when somebody has to take over that child's care for the day. But when they're in-house, the plan of cares are managed in-house, so you can communicate much more effectively. So substituting a worker that's out can keep on with the plan of care as it was indicated without having any lapses. And that's been a problem that's been voiced by some of the BHPs that are currently trying to work with the contractor ones.
And high turnovers that we have very little control over as well.
Can I just clarify, you said it's 23 that already exist? Does that mean there's 8 new?
Sorry, we're adding, of this 31 FTE, 23 of those are BHPs.
And then the rest are.
And the rest are
social work and teachers.
And so, you said 23 currently exist in the schools, or all 31?
I don't have the number that currently exists, we can ask.
So the BHPs, the 23, the bulk of those positions already exist. Those change from year to year based on student needs and so on. So, that there will be a significant reduction in outside BHPs, and our estimates are that we will need 23 of our own BHPs, because we have a formula for staffing each of those classrooms with X number of BHPs. And we already have, so all of our BHPs at Bayside are currently our employees. So these are BHPs that are currently out in schools that we will be able to not have, and then we will, in our brief classrooms, have a certain number of BHPs for classroom. This also involves adding 2 new teachers and 5.5 social workers and a social work supervisor.
That gets us to the 31. That's what I was trying to, and you said, I'm sorry, what was that, 5.5? What?
5.5 social workers, 2 teachers, and I think that adds up.
One and a half social worker is not in this, it's a different section, but 5 social workers, 2 teachers, and a lead social worker.
Could you, would it be possible to put that into a memo? I think already because there's such an increase in the number of positions, and there's a story to go along with it. It would be helpful to have that in
We'd be happy
that.
to do that.
As you were saying to Ethan, if there's, I think as long as you have the caveat that it's, it changes perhaps weekly. Take a snapshot of, March 27th or whatever you think, and say this is how many people we have who are outside contractors right now, and this is what we're going to have next year. And that way, I think it'll be more illustrative for people as they try to understand the 2 different years. So, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, and so our last major investment, and we will also touch on some of the smaller ones, is focused specifically on equity. So back to that slide where you saw the disparity in outcomes for our economically disadvantaged students. This is what our equity goal is all about, and one of the reasons why we feel very strongly that equity is the centerpiece of the work that we're trying to do as a school district. As with all of the others, we have a significant list of strategies that are how we believe we get there, and the particular the particular effort that we're proposing, which is our expansion of pre-kindergarten, is tied specifically to one of our benchmarks, which is increasing the percentage of students that enter school ready to learn. So we did not have a strategy that specifically spoke to early childhood, but our benchmark is very clearly related to that. I probably don't need to remind anybody in this room of what the research says about high-quality pre-kindergarten, but this slide is there to just refresh your memory on that. And obviously, the benefits are great early, and they accrue over the course of a lifetime. And so that's why I think that we've advanced this initiative the way that you will see it today. So our agreed to target, this is work that has been fairly high profile and that I'm sure you are in tune with, is to expand access over the next 5 years. So what we're proposing this year is the first installment of a 5-year plan to increase our seats by 140, which will give us enough seats to make sure that all of our students who are free and reduced lunch have access to quality pre-kindergarten, and that we continue to maintain the demographic profile of the district in the distribution of our seats. The overall investment, as I mentioned earlier, the bulk of the increases that you see in the FTE are coming from these two investments, so the GREES program and our pre-kindergarten, 13.5 positions that would be added as a result of this, and a overall investment of $730,000. There's a reduction in outside contracts that comes with this, so the net outcome in terms of the budget impact is what you saw earlier in the summary slide. So $560,000 is the overall impact of the kindergarten. Again, this first year, we're increasing by 2 classrooms and converting a number of existing positions that are currently in outside contractors into Portland Public School employees, and that's how you get to the 13.5 FTE increase that you see there. So that's it on the sort of overall investments. To remind you, and because most of these other investments are tied to the people goal, the last of our goals is our people goal, and that basically is the underpinning for everything. As you know, 80% of our budget is, salaries and benefits for employees. We're a people-intensive business, and so this is obviously the underpinning for everything else. We can't reach our achievement goal, our whole student goal, or our equity goal unless we have the most talented and diverse group of people working together to achieve our shared goals. The strategies in the comprehensive plan are on this slide, and the investments that we have are not specifically tied to any of these, so none of them are bold, unlike with the other strategy slides. But here are a summary of the investments that we're proposing as part of this year's budget. And the first one is, we talked about it earlier, the elementary teacher laptops. As we mentioned, as Alicia touched on, our elementary teachers have not had new laptops for, this will be 6 years now. The batteries are completely going. We're getting, people sending them back all the time for repairs. It's basically they've reached their useful life. So this would allow us to replace, this is a 4-year lease plan, 5-year lease plan, to replace all of those laptops. So unlike our middle school and high school teachers, where their laptops are refreshed as part of the MLTI, the Maine technology initiative, that it does not extend to elementary teachers, so we have to provide those. And, these are not things for people to play around with. This is the tool that people use for, a significant amount of their work. So it is a necessary tool that we need to be able to provide to our staff. So that's the teacher laptops. The next one is, over the course of the year, we have recognized that we cannot operate with a part-time teacher leader, which is in essence the principal at Peaks Island School. That position is currently a .5 position in the budget, and we are proposing to make that a 1.0 position. And so there's a cost obviously associated with doing that, and so that's what you see there. And I know they also, I believe the teachers also came to speak to the council about some of the challenges that they face. And one of the very significant challenges that our special ed teachers face is the amount of sort of coordination paperwork that is associated with special education. A couple of years ago, we reduced our staffing in the coordination of special ed because we tried something different with creating building-based positions, and as part of our reductions at that time, and we find that we can't operate, and it has added to the burden of our teachers greatly. And so this is an effort to try to create a structure that will be more supportive of their needs. And so that's what special ed coordination increases. And then you may have seen in the media that, across the state and really across the country, people are struggling to staff their transportation departments. There's obviously, there's a favorable job market, and this is not the highest paid positions, and they are incredibly challenging positions. I have spent over the last couple of weeks a few hours each week at our transportation department, taking the pulse of how people are feeling about some of the things that we're trying to do, and really trying to to understand the challenges that they face day in and day out. We have tried some new things this year, piloted them, and have been able to, in the last 3 months, reduce our vacancies entirely in transportation and, attract new staff, which has allowed us to actually offload some external contracted routes that are incredibly expensive. So we're institutionalizing, we're proposing to institutionalize some of those changes, and that's, the changes basically allow our bus drivers to see a career path within the transportation department. It allows us to create positions that are full-time positions instead of part-time positions. So right now, most of our contracted drivers are 30-hour drivers, and so by increasing some of these positions to 40-hour, they become more appealing to staff, and they're more likely to, to come and stay with us. And we're also building in some incentives for hiring, so staff will be able to make referrals, and if those folks actually wind up coming, going through training, getting hired, and staying with us for a certain period of time, there is a bonus that our staff will be eligible to receive. So that's what that $70,000 goes towards. And then the last thing is that 0.5 that I mistakenly added when we were talking about Breathe, and that's to add a social worker, and this is mislabeled because it's not at CAPS.
Oh, sorry.
It's supposed to be at Portland Adult Rec. This is again one of the identified needs that that have come from our staff, saying that we have obviously a very complex set of needs at Portland Adult Ed, and there's nobody there that can really do the triaging and connecting of clients to the social service network. And so this 0.5 FTE is to allow us to do that. In addition to that, we have, we're implementing a cybersecurity program at Taft. That's a brand new program that is, obviously high skills, high wages job. A lot of excitement about being able to start that, and that is fully offset in revenue from the increase in the EPS funding that you saw earlier. So they actually pay for this position, so it's included in that, in the CTE portion of the budget. And the last one is, this is long and complicated, but it basically allows us to continue our community eligibility, which allows us to have free lunch for all of our students at the 4 highest percentage of free and reduced lunch students. So that's at Reiki, East End, Presumscott, and Riverton. And so that allows us to continue to do that because of our numbers of free and reduced lunch students in some of those schools have been dropping. The reimbursement that we're eligible to receive from the feds drops as well, so we know that we will receive less money from the USDOE as a result of the U.S. Department of Agriculture as a result of that. And so this is our estimated delta between what we currently receive or what we would continue to receive at our current reimbursement rate with what we expect to receive with the lower reimbursement rate that we're going to be able to get. And so this allows us to continue to do that. Otherwise, we would have had to make decisions such as jettisoning one of the schools from that so that we would continue to receive the higher reimbursement rate. So this is designed to keep Reiki as a community eligibility school. And so that brings us to the total of $411,000 from these additional investments. And then the last slide is one that we've already, oh no, we have not seen this. Okay, do you want to walk through this?
So I went, sorry,
Can
so.
I just clarify one thing?
Yep.
I'm sorry if you said that, I don't understand why it's a revenue item. But
It's a revenue loss. So it shows up as an additional sort of expenditure. So I skipped that one.
Yeah. So this is the summary that you saw before, and that is just, sort of refresh your mind. And then with that, we'll go to Alicia.
So I know we talked about this at a prior meeting that you had wanted to see sort of if these investments were included, what would the budget look like? So if the investments were not included, we would see a spending increase of about 4.6 million or 4.17%. However, we would also need to reduce about $825,000 of additional Maine Care reimbursement from the BREATHE program. So our non-tax revenue increase would only be about $650,000. That includes the additional state subsidy of $700,000. So all other categories would actually be going down by $50,000. So the tax needs are not up there, but this would bring our tax, so you can see here the tax levy that we're requesting is 93.7 million. If we were to back those investments out, the tax levy would be about 91.9 million, which would be a tax rate of 11.52, an increase of 38 cents or 3.4% above this current year.
So basically, 2% of that on 5.4% is associated with.
Sorry, what was the mill rate again?
11.52.
So 2% of that 5.4% is the total sum of those investments that we just talked about.
I have to be honest, that was too fast for me to take it all in.
This last piece?
I'm just, trying to
So I was just-
understand exactly what just was said there. Forgive me.
No, that's okay. So,
Second year through the
No,
budget
you're-
stuff.
You're You're not alone.
Okay.
People in the audience
I'm just gonna have to-
So the
Okay.
the investment summary, there's an expenditure increase of 2.6 million, a revenue increase of about 825. So in this next slide, we're backing both of those out. So instead of 117.8 million, our budget would be 115.2 approximately.
Let me find where we are.
On the top
First
row.
line.
Okay, got it.
We're on two different slides here. So this first line,
Yep.
so by adding that 2.6 million in is how we get to the 117.8 that our budget request is. And then with the revenues, right now, our budget has about $24 million in non-tax revenue. But if we reduce out, the 825,000,
Can I just interrupt? That 825 is what we expect to be able to bill Maine Care for the BREATHE program. So this means if we didn't do the BREATHE program, we wouldn't get that reimbursement. And so that would be backed out of our revenue expectations.
Right, because those folks would continue to be independent.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, in total, all those net changes, would make the tax levy 91.9 million instead of the 93.7, that's on the third to last row. And the tax increase would be 38 cents as opposed to 60 cents. So right now, our tax increase, our tax rate is proposed to be 11.74, but if we were to take out that investment of 2.6 million and the associated revenue, our tax rate increase would be 38 cents, or 3.4% instead of 5.4%.
Yeah, that's why
Is
I'm
it-
not finding
is it-
them. Yeah.
Is it possible to try to, in a brief narrative,
I think if we had a separate column.
Or-
that
It's just
his numbers,
added
not like-
that subtracted that out and had that, we can.
if you can put it into a one-page?
It's funny, you look at it a million times and it makes sense to you, and now that we're going through it, I'm totally seeing that we're missing a column that would totally help you to understand this.
And it's us to understand, but also the folks that'll be looking at it on our website, and maybe it's up on yours. But if you can, that would be helpful.
Did I write this down correctly? Also, that 2% of the 5.4 is the investment.
You got it.
Other questions? That is the end.
Counselor Ray, welcome.
Good timing, good timing. Do you want me to just wrap it up for you?
Depends.
Just another, maybe a dumb question, but out of curiosity. The BREATHE program, I understood is primarily focused on folks with behavioral health needs, but included in there would be students with significant other kinds of disabilities, not necessarily behavioral health. or
With behavior and
physical.
emotional health.
So like, rehab students, with physical disabilities, that's separate.
That's it. Those students are in our functional life skills programs. Those are, we also have those, and those exist, as a continuum across our schools as well.
Thank you.
Well, I could, some of the other stuff, but.
Go ahead.
Well, thanks for all this information. I think I got most of it. But pre-K, can you just talk a little bit, I don't know who it is. I know you guys recently had a lengthy discussion. I didn't follow it, but I saw something in the paper about different ways to fund pre-K. And could you just talk a little bit about how you got to where you are?
Yeah, so
I don't know who's
there's two different questions, I think, wrapped into that. One is, we, with the board, have reviewed different routes to to achieving the same goal. So the goal being significantly increasing access to high-quality pre-kindergarten for 4-year-olds. We had 3 different routes to getting there. And that's what the board has spent, the better part of the winter reviewing those 3 options and arriving at what we currently have in front of you, which is primarily doing it in our schools. The other options were outsourcing it altogether or a combination of outsourcing and running it in district. And we sort of are a hybrid of that because we still will have outside partners, but the staff will be Portland Public School employees. So that's where the board actually landed. But what we were going for was always what we are going for, which is significant increase in access to 4-year-old pre-kindergarten for families and Portland. So that's the one question. The one thing that I want to point out is that the board has also been very clear about the fact that this may or may not be something that forever lives in the Portland Public Schools budget. And so we are working with a community-wide effort to look at different ways of paying for this scale-up. So this year's scale-up is in the budget. So we do have a plan to scale up 2 classrooms this year, and that's actually in our budget. And then there is a plan to add 2 classrooms next year, 2 classrooms the following year, so 9 classrooms over the next 5 years. But it could potentially be that the funding for that doesn't come through our budget, but that there is a different way of doing it. So there is a revenue task force that is being convened that I'm co-chairing along with Mike Bork, that will bring together stakeholders from different walks of life. I've asked the mayor to help us appoint somebody from the council to serve on that as well. And the task force will look at the ways that other cities that have done this type of expansion have done that. And for those who sort of have followed some of that work, that there's a list of 20 different ways in which cities have done this that range from in the school budget to TIF funding to a local option sales tax to there's a variety of different ways to do that, to a mix of philanthropic and government sources. And so that is the work of that revenue task force that Starting Strong is convening to begin at the end of it.
Can I add to that the sort of primary, I think, reason that we decided to go with in-house as opposed to some outsourced employees was with regard to wage equity and with particular concern for being able to retain employees in all those positions rather than, some employees kind of wait for an opportunity that's going to pay them a higher wage and what that means to the education of the pre-K programs to have employees be retained and working continuously. And then the other thing I wanted to add was just that for the first year, we didn't see a huge, in terms of the funding expectation, we didn't see a huge difference between what it would cost for this first year doing it either way.
And could you, it's your decision to figure out how you best want to do that. I would just say that once we've all done it, once you implement something, it's hard to take it away. So if you have somewhere, and I'm sure you do, it's probably on your website if I look, but if you have somewhere where you could either forward a memo or maybe slightly tweak one that would just kind of show what, and it's probably, again, I'm sure it's there, one proposal cost this, one proposal cost that, these are the benefits of this, these are the, I just think that would be helpful as we're going through our process, because we don't get to say how you should do it, but when people ask us questions, it just makes it easier if we get that information. So if you have something like that. You know, I don't want you to create a lot of work, but I suspect there's some document that would either is readily available or could be slightly tweaked.
I'll just add one quick point, which is just for context setting. Currently, 22% of our 4-year-olds in Portland attend a public pre-K program. Statewide, the average is over 38%. So we are quite far behind the state. Just underscoring the need to move forward on this, and we have paused the program now for 2 years in order to go through this very extensive process of figuring out.
It's a committee that's working.
Yes, and it involved a deep data dive, looking at what are the obstacles now to families participating in our pre-K program. And the changes that we've made include addressing those obstacles. Right now, it's a part-day program. We don't have before care and after care. We need to deal with transportation, all of those issues. And so this is really a revamped program in addition to an expansion that will make the program a real option for families as we move to enable, to get more to where the rest of the state is and beyond that.
Thank you. And on the pre-K, I know the answer to this, but because we've all gotten a number of emails in the last couple of days, one from very eloquently dictated, I think, by an 8-year-old named Leah. Could you just speak for those that may be listening about what's going on with the Peaks Island pre-K?
Yeah, so we are, and the reason you don't see that reflected in this is because the Finance Committee is actually going to amend my initial recommendation to include the addition of ed tech at pre-K, at Peaks, that will allow us to continue to have what we started this year, which was a kindergarten and pre-kindergarten and kindergarten mixed age classroom that just didn't work without that additional support. And so the original request to me was for the addition of a teacher, which at that time was a teacher for 3 students. I did not support that. And subsequently, as we started to understand the depth of concern about it and the importance of being able to preserve that program, we agreed, the teacher leader working with the staff agreed that they could make it work with a ed tech, and so that is going to be advanced by the Finance Committee tomorrow, and hopefully voted in and added to the budget. That's a cost of $30-something thousand.
39 yeah. And we've also found that there are now at least 4 students who are planning, and possibly others, because there are other families that folks on the island are aware of, who are looking to move, and that this is a key piece, as well as the Peaks Island Children's Workshop had revamped their offerings and really focused on birth to 3 when the 4-year-olds came to the Peaks Island School, and that the loss of 4-year-old pre-K would have really created a problem with the Children's Workshop, which already has a waiting list. As well as there have been an amazing number of babies born or anticipated during this coming year. So there's some changes in that community that just didn't appear at first, but as we've dug deeper into it and talked with the community, talked with staff, we've been able to figure out a solution that will continue the pre-K, not dislocate or disrupt the provision of the birth to 3, where there's a huge need.
Another, we didn't talk about it, but I've had people ask me about it in terms of the commission that I don't know the exact title, but
Enrollment and Facility Study.
Just for those that might be listening to us this evening, are there any changes in the budget as a result of the work that commission did, or can you just describe it briefly? Without getting in, you've talked to us about what the charge is. I just think if anybody's listening.
There are.
So Any
Now,
trouble?
that is consistent with the recommendation that the commission made. The commission evaluated a number of options and recommended that none of those options be implemented by the board, which again, they also said that it's the board's, it's obviously within the board's purview to implement them with or without those recommendations. The commission did recommend that we look for ways to place some of our additional services, so the administration building, the Bayside, which we are already planning to do, that is incorporated in, as part of the brief, but that was something that we intended to do before the Enrollment Facility Study Commission came together. So we are absolutely committed to figuring out where to move the, administration building. The only other outsourced or, sort of leased, not built, not school district owned property is where Portland Adult Ed is. And we are renewing the lease with the Archdiocese for 1 year. We will continue to evaluate options, but none of the options that we looked at, the closest was Portland High School, and that was not adequate for what Portland Adult Ed currently needs. So we did not have a ready option for that. But we are committed to moving the administration building out and eventually being able to offload the 353 Cumberland property. I do want to just caution everybody that that is a $200,000 bond interest payment. So, we're not saving millions of dollars, we're saving a couple $100,000. And the one thing that I want to be very cautious of, when the district moved into that building, they bought the building for, I think, I'm going to get the numbers wrong, you probably know, so it's like they bought the building itself was valued at 2.5, and we spent somewhere close to 3 because the building had to be rehab to be able to accommodate the offices. So we definitely don't want to move and have it cost us another $500,000 because that's 2.5 years of savings that will go out the window in one fell swoop. So we have to be very careful about finding a way to do this where we basically pack up our pickups and bring our own office chairs so that we're not, spending another $500,000 to move the administration building.
Thank you.
Could I just add on the enrollment facilities? It always gets me a little bit, having been a prime author of the amended recommendation, despite the fact that I couldn't be there because that meeting, of course, was scheduled while ISLE and I were in DC, just like the public hearing was scheduled on the night that the Health and Human Services Committee was meeting, so there was often a lot of conflicts with council schedules. But to start off with, there were none recommendations on that recommendation that was made by the commission is just, in my opinion, not accurate. And there has been a lot of talk about what the commission did not recommend to go forward with, and not a lot of talk, I think, about the first bullet on the recommendations, which was that it was imperative that efficiencies and quality be looked at and continue to be looked at, despite the fact that there were no easy solutions identified by the commission. And so I think that is something that I certainly didn't see that picked up in the press reporting. I didn't see it picked up in the school department's press release. And there was a specific recommendation made, and that was that in the short term, that both Portland Adult Ed and the administration be looked at to be moved into existing school buildings. So we didn't make a recommendation as to whether it should be Portland High or any particular school, but that be done in the short term, and then the longer term work be done around the broader efficiencies and noting the suboptimal efficiencies or lack thereof in our high schools. So I do think there's a lot of work left to be done. The setup, both the charge and the amount of time that was given for the commission was essentially a failed structure. I asked for that process to be bifurcated when it became obvious, when we were given about 20 minutes in breakout sessions to come up with ideas to be studied after having gone through a few meetings of data of what the efficiencies and inefficiencies are in our schools. And that was a useful exercise, I think, to have the consultant provide all of that information. But then we were broken up into small groups and literally pulled out within a half an hour to try to say, that's enough time to think about what might be some options for our consultant to look at. So of course we tried to come up with some ideas, and there were some innovative ideas in there, some of which just wouldn't save any money. And that wasn't our charge. For instance, expeditionary learning K-12 idea came out. Interesting idea, didn't save any money, wasn't part of what the charge was for the commission. So of course that goes by the wayside. But I think I suggested bifurcating the process when it became clear that the only changes that we were looking at to save money, which was the qualified initial recommendation of doing a junior high and a senior high, and not closing either one of the high schools as has been reported, but purposing one to a junior high and one would be a senior high, that would not be something that could have been implemented this coming fiscal year as of July 1. I think that was obvious to everybody, that that's not something you turn on a dime on. And hence, the process that we were engaged in, which was really to find savings for this coming fiscal year, that we should have switched our focus as a commission and been given some extra time to look at what efficiencies could be had for recommendations for this coming fiscal year, and then additional time to look at what could be looked at longer term. And ultimately, we were not there was no either interest on the school board's part or whoever's part to pursue that bifurcated process. And so we were stuck with, we're either going to make a wholesale recommendation of major changes that we know can't be implemented this coming year, or we're not. And what we did, I think the big intent, and I can speak to this having been a prime author along with David Brenneman and Ben Grant after the initial draft was done, because neither David nor I could be at the meeting. So we needed a partner who could be at the meeting, was to really say back to the school board who created the commission that this work is not done, that there are major inefficiencies in the schools and high schools in particular that the data brought out, and that work really needs some focus, but that needs to be done in a different way. And I think at the end of that statement you see that there's a note about no hasty processes, this commission really just didn't, the structure and time frame just did not work. In other words, it was an impossible task. It was set up to fail at the end of the day. So I do think there's a lot more in that recommendation than what's been reported, and to just simply say there was no recommendation, I think doesn't really get at the intent of at least the authors of that recommendation. And there was a good amount of thought and energy that went into trying to put something together that could get the support of the folks around the table, hopefully, that didn't let this die. Because I know it's just, for me anyway, when I start seeing high school efficiency levels falling down to 40%, and our consultant says that you would expect a model like that to be running at 90%, I think, boy, that's money that we really could use to improve educational value and the quality of education for our students. And we have to do the hard work of finding the process through that. And unfortunately, this commission was not able to do that given the time frame and the very limited charge. So thank you for that.
Thanks for elaborating, Counselor.
Anyone else?
So, thanks for the presentation. Obviously, this is a much better picture than the last time we were trying to predict, so that's very good. I wanted to go into a couple of things. So the Breathe program, we're going to get more detailed information coming back on that.
So can I show you one thing that's on I just want to show you where all of our information is. Okay. So on our website, if you go home in budget development materials, it pops up this page. So it's everything that we put out so far. I know Brendan also included a link today. But
So I think it's on our.
it's on the agenda,
online.
correct?
It's on our agenda.
So in the budget book in the back, we actually put together fairly detailed investment narratives because we recognize that people are going to have questions on many of these things. So it starts on page 16. You saw that obviously first piece in our presentation, but it gets into the FTE detail, the cost, and then a narrative of sort of what's happening. This is for all of our investment areas. They should all have one in here. So there is a little bit more information available if you guys want to look there, but we certainly have our sort of charge to make sure that we're explaining it thoroughly. So we will work on it.
So with the significant caveat that I have not read through that, so I just want to make sure, we're saying that the total proposal, it's 31 FTEs, and are we saying that there's 23 total FTEs that are currently in the building?
Correct.
They're just not part of
Our
Portland
FTEs.
Public Schools, they're not part of...
I think that's what I heard before.
No, we've got a takeaway on this to sort of to give you exactly how many, we have many more than 23 BHPs currently in the schools. This is what we will need to be able to staff the program as we've proposed. There will still be one-on-one BHPs run out of Connections for Kids and Woodford's and all of those other agencies that are also providing those services. So that does not go away. There will still be individual students with BHPs that are not district. But this is what it will take us to staff.
Sorry, though, so am I misunderstanding? So we're not anticipating that if we went through with this, are we anticipating that there would be any change on the private side?
There will be change, and that's, that's what I was about to say, that we will actually try to document what we will expect in terms of the reduction. So we will be able to look through how many of our current BHPs are assigned to students who will in all likelihood go into one of the Breathe classrooms, and that person's BHP will be one of those 23.
You said, I think I heard you say earlier that it could change any given day, so you're going to take a snapshot on a
That's
particular
right.
date and base it on that.
So that's what I'm seeking to wrap my head around, because we're going to get a ton of questions of this from our colleagues. And I think it's an important discussion. I suspect that we'll get a bunch of questions that say, well, that cuts both ways. If there are people in the schools serving students in our schools, then why would I want to do this? So I want to be able to respond intelligently to that and understand what the overall impact would be. So that was one.
I'm just curious on that. Do the students and the students' family have a say in whether they continue to go with their individual BHPs, say, in a classroom or move into a Breathe classroom?
Any placement in these programs is through the IEP process, which involves parental consent.
Gotcha. So the parents would have a choice. Okay. Thank you. I think that's about that.
Oh, sorry, I didn't want to say something.
All right. So then, can we, looking at these documents, I know where I'm going, can we pull up the multi-year documents?
Yes. How did I know you wanted to? Okay. We have a variety of them. So
That's true.
the ones that are on here use different assessed value numbers, so we're gonna replace those with what I talked to Brendan today about those changes, so.
No, this was asking, it's 9 sliding down, we got all the end
Keeps pushing against
I
me.
keep going,
I keep
keeps
hitting Anna.
banging on
Hey,
me.
you're way too intimate over there.
Okay,
Thank you.
so, this is the same format we've done for a variety of years. This takes a look at the budget as it's put together right now and doesn't change anything going forward. So we've talked at our finance committee, the need to sit down and have a multi-year budget planning process. Unfortunately, we're right in the middle of the budget season, and we've talked about that potentially being a June or August discussion of, you know, we have plans for things like pre-K and sort of what are the next Portland Promise investments and that kind of thing, and really plan that out over time. So I understand the need to do that. So that is not here.
Right, and it's not a criticism.
And it's never been done that way.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, Mike Wilson and I were intimately involved in, I'm not disputing how much time that takes. I just want to understand the assumptions that are in here. So there are not, beyond what we've seen in the presentation tonight, additional Portland Promise investments in any of those out years.
Correct.
Okay. So that is
But,
helpful
but,
to
so let me just be clear, but the way that these are figured, which is basically an escalation, it escalates the investments that are being proposed this year. So those are, they're assumed to continue and they're assumed to escalate appropriately.
Right, but I mean, if I take just pre-K standing alone, we already know that there's going to be an additional investment on top of an escalator for what you have in the FY20 budget.
If
Oh, possibly.
it's in our budget, right? But that's the
But I'm just taking that
commission.
as one example. You
Right.
do not anticipate that what is in here as new investments is the last round of new investments through FY24.
Correct.
Okay, so I want to, so I think you're about to tell me that we're going to update some of the tax numbers based on holding the valuation.
Yes, so
steady.
if you scroll down,
Yeah.
and I think I might have given you different numbers. So this is based on adding 65 million a year, Brendan, which I think is what you told me today. So
60.
60?
Yeah. You have it in there. You have 60.
Then I did what you told me. So that's that. The only other piece that I guess I would point out on the revenue side is we do anticipate that our federal revenue will increase slightly every year. So the BREEF program reimbursement formula that we're using this year actually only estimates 75% of total hours that we can bill for. As this is the first year, we didn't want to put in 100% of the billable hours that we think we could have. So that actually might step up over time. However, obviously with that comes, you can see our seat numbers way higher than what it's been in the past because we will have all this additional federal revenue. So those actually do get bumped up.
Yeah, so I guess where I'm going with this, I mean, obviously there's a lot of variables to unwind. The state revenue side of things may be, you know, an unknown in our favor, certainly compared with conversations that we've been having for some time. But the bottom line is we're expecting to get to $138.4 million in the next 4 fiscal years. Plus whatever additional investments are going to be asked for in those next 4 years.
So I think historically that 5th year is generally escalated. This obviously doesn't assume any level of turnover savings or this assumes every single year we have a health insurance increase of 8%. So I mean, it's just sort of the worst case scenario year after year, which doesn't historically happen. But that's the way this is sort of built, so which is why we're talking about the need to do it.
Right, I mean, and looking at it, I mean, my gut reaction says we may actually be underestimating the expense side, and we may also be underestimating the state revenue side in out years. I mean,
Yeah, so the state revenue.
not that I would ever tell you to budget the revenue too
Higher.
high for planning purposes, but
So this
it's just a lot
assumes,
better than last year.
right, so we've talked about, sort of at least 3 or 2 or 3 years out on where we think we know what the valuation is gonna be, sort of what's happening. So this actually shows if, because we know that the proposal is to put more money into the, education, budget next year. So this actually shows a second year of a mill rate decrease. With a second year of mill rate decrease, we're still looking at $1.5 million loss. Because next year we will see over $500 million added to our valuation. So that takes into consideration a few years out. You'll notice I held it steady. There's bills out right now that would require us to be funded at a certain level. I believe it's 100% of your special ed costs, and this year we're at just over $13 million. So, you know, in a perfect world, we wouldn't drop below that amount. So that's about what you see here.
Okay.
Can I just follow up on this out-year planning? Are each of the years showing the increased amount of debt service
Yes.
for the school bonds?
Yes, Bill sent me the debt schedule, and these are current, current debts that we have, pushed out 5 years. This also assumes $1 million added every single year for BFOF. So because we know that's happening, that is included in this.
Gotcha.
Okay. All for now?
Yes, so forgive my late entry. If this has been addressed, tell me it's been addressed, I'll go to the tape later. If it hasn't been addressed and it can't be answered tonight, I can get an answer later also. But we have had, and you brought this up already, let me know. We've had some teachers come and speak during public comment. Did this come up already? No, you're just aware of it.
Depends on where you go with it.
It's part of what they have expressed. I think they want to make sure that we're aware of the need in the system, and they want us to be very thoughtful on the council end as we're going through the budget. But they have also, what I have heard is that there are a lot of challenges in classrooms right now, which I understand. I've been a teacher. It is really hard to be in a classroom and have 20 kids, 29 kids, you know, and to be one person and to have all those kids have different needs and behavioral issues, and some of them with IEPs and some, you know. So we've heard all of this, and so my question regarding the budget is, with changes that you're making with the BREATHE program, with other additions, how will this get at the core services and help teachers that we have right now to feel like they're being supported?
So there are a couple things that I'll talk about that are specific sort of things that have come from that. One is the changes that we're proposing in our special education department structure, and that's to sort of relieve teachers of some of the compliance paperwork challenges that they face. So that's one. And we're also adding a part-time social worker at Portland Adult Ed. So those are specifically things that have come up. The BREATHE program in particular is designed to help to alleviate some of that stress in classrooms that is brought on by students who are, you know, as a result of trauma, as a result of, you know, many different, you know, factors, are very needy and require a significant amount of attention. And so that, the BREATHE program, the level of sort of capacity to be able to take those students and give them more intensive support than what a classroom teacher, even a classroom teacher with a BHP can provide. That is a big, that is one of the big reasons for that particular investment. And pre-kindergarten doesn't deal with the issue today, but it helps with the issue into the future, and that is why, pre-kindergarten, across the board, when you talk to people, they say that that's the single most important investment that we can make, is because that is actually, helping kids that come to school without the preparation to go into their kindergarten and first grade classrooms to be ready for that. And so I think that is, obviously that's the long game, that's not the, going to help you this year, but the special ed changes and the Breathe program is specifically designed to do that. Some of the things that we did not do that people came, and we actually had Sue Olafson speak at the finance hearing yesterday. We've not added any music staff, which is one of the things that they specifically, and I assume that they probably, shared some of those concerns with the or library staff. So those are two areas where she, in essence, called us out for not having added those things. So.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just follow up on that? And I did appreciate it as you were going through that it seemed like a lot of the things the teachers were asking for are being addressed from the social workers, special ed, all that kind of stuff. I mean, is it safe to say that you agree that we should have more music teachers, and do you agree that there should be more, like, that those cuts are things that over time we would try to restore?
I have not looked at them closely enough. Clearly, like, let me just take library, for example. And we've done this for you, and we've done it for the board before. We've shown, what does EPS say that we're supposed to have, and what do we actually have. And across the board, Portland has more in every category than what the state says we, again, it's the minimum that you're supposed to have. And we do that across the board with the exception of library. So when people actually call us out for that, it seems fairly, if that is the minimum and we don't actually meet the minimum, there's a long story as to why we don't. And, it has to do with individual schools making decisions about how they want to allocate their staffing and trading a librarian in for a, a coach or something along those lines. But that is one area where I absolutely agree. I've not done the deep dive into the music to be able to say, like, people will say we had X number of teachers and now we only have, X number of teachers, and that's a smaller number. But, our numbers of students in classrooms have also decreased. I would expect as we add in early childhood that we would need to increase our, our sections of music and things along those lines, because those teachers need their planning periods, and those students need. That's part of our whole student goal, is making sure that students have exposure to all of those things like art, music, and PE, world languages that all of our students receive. So I would expect that there will be increases in those areas, but I don't have like a specific, we need 3 additional music teachers, but probably we need to add music, we probably need to add art and world languages.
I have a few other questions I want to cover Bill Bob. A lot of them have been asked, so that's very good. The metrics that you have, 92% graduate, 50% reduction in achievement gaps, 95% feeling valued, do you have where those are right now?
We talked about that this morning with my research director, and so we are getting that updated as we speak.
Okay. And this relates a little bit to what Councilor Costa was just talking about. You have that first slide that shows, FY 18, 19, 20, sort of the Portland promise as it progresses. Is there a 2021, 2022 sort of, not that's fleshed out yet, but sort of like, okay, as we go through these things, or are we making the big pieces now and we just need to enhance those, like pre-K, et cetera, are there big next steps?
There are things that I have in my mind. I think one of the things that we've done this year is really engage very deeply with the board to have them understand what we were proposing and the value that they bring, and I would not want to circumvent that process and say, like, we need to do this, we need to do the other thing. I think that is, the process that as a staff we need to engage and bring the board along to understand what are the different things that will help us to achieve the Portland promise. And so, there will be other things, but those are things that we need to work together on.
And at this stage of the 18, 19, 20, you feel like this budget moves us as fully as you expect us to move in this year toward the Portland promise? Like this is if you had your druthers, this is what you would be doing this year in order to move us forward in that, or is there?
If I had my druthers and you guys didn't exist.
He had one of those blank
Well-
checks.
What's next for Walmart?
Checks
Yeah.
from Walmart.
They can figure out how to get money to grow on trees.
Absolutely not, but, that's obviously
When
why,
we spend more.
that's why we have, checks and balances, and I think the board has been extremely responsible, and I think that, you will be extremely responsible as well, and so I have tremendous amount of impatience when I look at those gaps and realize that, they've been there for a long time, and unless we specifically and deliberately address the things that cause them, we're not gonna see a change in them. And that's where, I feel that these particular things that we have as investments this year help to advance that in very real and, I believe, soon measurable ways. But, would I do more of? Would we necessarily want to wait 5 years to do pre-kindergarten? I don't think anybody here would say, like, if we had a blank check that we would want to wait 5 years, but we don't have a blank check.
So it's safe to say there are certainly things that if there were more money, there would be more investments to be able to make this year. It's not that you're feeling like this piece, okay. Adult ed staying where it is, I think I've got that piece already. The adult ed revenue, is that from the state? Is that what that little line, that little tiny green line is?
So it's a combination of state subsidy, it's about $500,000. And actually that did go up this year for the first time in a while due to investments we've made there for the last 2 years. And then they have like less than 200,000 of actual tuition revenue that people pay.
Those are for the recreational classes.
And the local revenue drop from FY18 to now at 2.5 million, that's the CTE tuition, is that what that was? That came up?
Yes.
Okay. And have you done an educational mill rate comparison to other service center communities? I know oftentimes you've done that in the past.
We
Maybe-
haven't updated that for this year.
Okay, maybe at our next time we get together, that'd be helpful. And can you talk a little bit about the reductions that you made on the elementary school side in terms of the teachers?
Can you speak up?
Sorry, can you asking about the elementary school teacher reductions and how you came to that?
Again, we don't look at those as reductions. We look at that as the normal adjustments that we need to make every year based on, what we expect is going to be there for next year. And that's, the methodology is not super sophisticated, but it's what we've used for ever and ever and ever. And that is, this is the rollover of this year's third grade into fourth grade into fifth grade, and so on. And so based on that and applying our the thresholds that we have, we look at where we're under those thresholds, and in those cases, we say we're going to reduce a teacher so that it gets to being within the threshold. And where it's above the threshold, we say, well, we're going to add a teacher. So we've done that exercise, and we've shared that with the board.
So this link right here, this elementary class size, is basically a step-by-step of how we do this. So to be very honest with you, there were 8 teachers that kind of were highlighted for us that said, based on numbers alone, what could we do? However, Jeannie Crocker goes back to discuss with all the building principals, and they give us more information to say, here's some things you might not know about that student population, and we sort of make some changes, so it ended with 5 teachers. So that's in here, in elementary class size, and it's fairly thorough, explaining step by step how we do this.
And just if I could, for the public, if you don't mind, just for those of us that have been on the school board or are on the school board, I mean, and then there's typically a process where you'll usually come back and fine tune that sometime around August as actual.
To give you an example, last year we reduced classes at Lyseth, and then when their numbers materialized in the fall, it necessitated bringing those classes back.
And that's pretty routine. I mean, the board will go through a whole round of hiring in August to say, oh, we needed a new kindergarten teacher, we needed a new third grade teacher.
So are those layoffs, or is that just open positions that won't be
But
filled?
we expect that with retirements and movement, that we will be able to absorb those positions within our staffing for next year.
So let me just reiterate, I think what Councilor Costa said, it's good news, certainly better than what we expected from the first time, but very pleased with the kind of investments you're making, so.
I think the mayor just touched on it, but just to reiterate for the public, are there any major changes to Portland Adult Ed proposed in this?
There is an increase in the hourly staff wages. That is a process that we started 2 years ago, and so we're continuing that, and we are adding that .5 social worker, and I think everything else is just some movement within that Anita is making, so that's the essence of it.
Okay, so not to get outside the realm of this meeting, but for those that aren't already aware, one of the things that the Economic Development Committee is working on, which of course you're well aware of, is how we're going to use some additional TIF revenues that are coming in from newly captured properties in the waterfront TIF district. So we have actually been working in tandem with Portland Adult to develop proposals. So just if anyone is not aware, Anita and Liz have already presented to the Economic Development Committee. So we're going to be taking that up for potential recommendation. Obviously, by definition, that will not be in the general fund budget ever. But in parallel to this, the Economic Development Committee may very well make a recommendation to fund a program run by the same staff that run adult ed. I will qualify for the workforce development and job training provisions of the state's TIF statute. So I don't want to confuse things too much, but I also don't want to let the whole meeting go by without notifying everyone that we're talking about that, because it could be somewhat substantial.
And we're obviously very excited about the possibilities there, and look forward to continuing to work with the council on that.
I'd like to go back to sort of a really big picture question that some of you have been on the council and the school board longer than I've been in elected office might know. But first question, there's a couple in this room, but what year was the Portland Promise approved and by whom?
2017, at the very end of 2017, by the school board.
I'm having a hard time
By the
hearing
school
you.
board?
Yeah.
Yep, okay. And at the time, what was the cost estimate for the program's implementation?
There was no process.
So they adopted a program without having any
It's
sense
not
of
a
what it would
program.
cost?
It's not a program, it's a
Okay.
strategic plan.
Okay, so it's a strategic plan, but there was no attempt to sort of quantify what it would cost when it was adopted?
It was not intended to be a budget plan. It was intended to be, these are the goals that we strive to achieve, and these are the ways that we think we will get there. And so it does not articulate, this will happen in year one, this will happen in year two, and this will happen in year three. That is the year-to-year process that we've been engaged in that brings you the investments that you see this year, the investments that you saw last year, and so on.
Okay, so if I understand, what I'm hearing is that the school board adopted essentially what was a strategic plan. And is there, at this point, then, an implementation plan and a cost estimate that's been done? So it's a strategic plan, and essentially it gets implemented bit by bit in each budget, but we don't have a sense for how much more it could cost. I'm just trying to get a sense. So I know from enrollment in facilities that our population, school, K-12 population, not counting pre-K, obviously, because that's going to add if we increase classrooms, but the K-12 population is steady. It's been steady for the last 10 years, roughly steady. We expect it, at least based on the numbers we just got, to be steady. And I'm seeing last year, we approved 4.5% increase in the budget year over year. And then this year, request for 6.5%. So that's 2 years, that'd be 11% increase on a stable population. But we don't have a sense for how many more years of significant increases it will take to achieve the goals.
So just to understand, I mean, you know.
And I'm just trying to make sure I'm not, this is not a criticism. I can see you're sort of like, I'm getting it wrong. I'm not trying to get it wrong. I'm really trying to understand, because I hear over and over again that this is a plan that's been adopted and it's been approved. And I'm just trying to understand what it is exactly, and how we manage, or whether we can even manage without additional resources, say from the state or something, to implement it. So that's the root of my trying to
And I think
understand.
that's when somebody asks the question, are there other things that you would do? Of course there are. And so this is, you know, a realization that to be able to do the things that we need to do to be able to impact that gap that we see. One, it requires that we continue the work that we currently do. So it does not assume that any of that goes away. And that alone costs more money every year, right? Even without these investments, the increase this year would be 3.5%. So that's first and foremost, to do what we currently do, which gets us the results that we currently have, is going to cost more money every year.
I understand escalators. Obviously, we deal with that in the city budget, and we have the same exact escalators. I think that you all have, with salaries, with benefits, right? It, you know, CPI, you know, was 2.8% in 2018, and of course, medical inflation typically outpaces that, et cetera. So I understand that basic concept. I don't expect a level budget. I'm just trying to understand how the sort of where we are in the process of implementing a plan that's been adopted, and what we should be expecting to see, or what you all are expecting to bring. And I guess what I'm hearing is those numbers have not really been, there's not necessarily an implementation plan that you say this year, next year we'll bring this, and next year we'll bring that, and we expect this level of increase each year over and above our escalators. Is that right? Okay.
To some extent. So this year, for example, with pre-kindergarten, there is an expectation that, you know, for the next 4 years, there will be an increase of 2 classrooms. We know what the cost is associated with that, and we will be able to build that in if it doesn't get funded in a different place, right? So that's, I think, what makes it difficult to say, you know, this is exactly what it's going to cost, because as, you know, Councilor Costa just mentioned in talking about TIF funding being used for, you know, some of the expenses at Portland Adult Ed, that could come off the books, and that would reduce the tax expectations on the city if it were funded from a different source. So just in the same way that we can tell you we have a plan to increase our pre-kindergarten slots, classrooms over the next few years, It may not be in the budget. It may be that it is funded out of TIF, it is funded out of, the state, it is funded out of a different, it is different out of a different source. So it will be hard to say this is what the tax impact of all of those things will be. But that one in particular, we can tell you that that's going to be there. We are going to work on what are the next things that we need to do to be able to impact the, achieve the goals that we set out to achieve. We have strategies, we know what those are, and we also have the realization that there's a limited amount of additional money every year. And so this is not a science of saying, these are the 6 things that we're going to do and we're going to do them on the schedule, because that may not be realistic given where we are at a given point in time. So we are very much looking at, okay, so we've done this is what we are able to achieve with that, and now what's the next thing that we need to do to be able to impact our goals? And so, no, we don't have a specific, these are the 7 things that we're going to do over the next 5 years. But if if somebody asked me and I had a blank check, I would tell you exactly what we're
Can I take a stab at trying to further explain the Portland Promise? It's our comprehensive plan, but it's our articulation of the district's goals and values. And so everything that we do is tied to that. So all the work that we take up as a board, we justify through the Portland Promise, so that we're not, straying in different directions, and that we have a focus on the goals and priorities and vision for the district. And similarly, our budget is guided by the Portland Promise, so that all the investments that we make are accountable and justifiable under the Portland Promise. So it's less like a program that's going to expire at a certain point in time. It's a justification for the investment, the priority investments that the superintendent has put forward. That helps.
And even, wouldn't it also be true to say that some of the achieving these goals is not necessarily new money? It may be the ways we're teaching, it may be relationship building with kids, it's kind of making sure that our schools are working. So it's how are our teachers interacting with their students and our principals and all of that work. If you're trying to achieve equity, what are our policies? Everything from a gender-neutral bathroom perhaps to making sure that every...
How about recess?
Recess,
Recess
whatever.
would be good at middle school.
But
Not
those things are
school
not,
anyway.
those are not necessarily cost items, but certainly we know this year, the cost item of the Portland Promise is around 1.7 million, right? So we've seen it now for a couple of years. It's not the bulk of the budget by any stretch, but it's a, it's a good investment to help us move that.
And I'll just add one quick thing, which is there's, it was developed in a very bottom-up way, and there's a tremendous buy-in across our schools into these set of values, and they have changed the organization in a very thorough way of how we're running the schools. So if I sit at a Reiki PTO meeting, I hear the lead teachers talk in all of this language that we've been talking about tonight, and in what they're prioritizing at the school, in the same way that the superintendent is talking about, our direction as a district.
No, that's all helpful. I'm just trying to understand how we fit it into a budget, and how many years worth of budget increases it would, we're looking at to sort of get there and to put it into context. And so that's helpful. If I could ask a question, Portland Adult Ed, could you, in the past I've heard about waiting lists and wait times and not being able to essentially meet the needs. How is that looking these days?
we will add that to the list and we can get you exactly what we have in terms of.
I know in the past, I feel like I remember hearing it was a big issue, but then maybe last year it was starting to kind of maybe we were starting to, maybe, if my recollection was
I mean,
right,
I
we're
think
starting
you will
to.
always hear that there are wait lists at Portland Adult Ed, and I'm going to probably like go too far in trying to explain this, and
Do you want us to cut you off right
Yeah.
now?
No, it's fine. I'm happy. Yeah, it wasn't, it's supposed to be, yeah, no, that's fine. I'm happy that, yeah, it's, so that's fine. I guess,
Thank you.
last year,
saving me from myself.
last year, I remember about 40% of a Portland adult ed, I don't know if it was students or budget, was English, learning English. And we have students from not just Portland, but around the area who come and get those services. And it came to light that, under state requirements, we can't charge for those providing that service. But there was no prohibition, of course, and saying to South Portland or Westbrook or Falmouth or Gorham or anyone, if you want your residents to use our services, you get to help fund it. I asked for that to be looked into. I guess it hadn't been approached with the other other municipalities who were providing services for their residents, and I'm wondering what progress has been made on that front.
So we're not charging and have no authority to be able to charge people for, or to send a bill to municipalities or anything along those lines. The state recognizes that. They have, in the same way that you heard, Alicia talk about the fact that under the regionalization plans, we got some additional money from the state in the EPS. They have established hubs. So that is basically recognizing that there are regional programs, and they're directing some of their discretionary money and grants and things along those lines to those hubs to be able to provide additional services that are sort of regional in nature, looking for efficiencies, and also, recognizing that, adults sometimes go to classes in places where they work, because that's, they do it, right after work, or they do it right before they go to work, and things along those lines. So there is progress at the state level around that, but we do not, to sort of specifically answer your question, we do not send bills to any municipality saying, 7 people from South Portland are taking English 1, and 3 are taking English 2.
I didn't ask about bills. I asked about talking with those municipalities about our allowing their residents to avail themselves of our program, and whether they were interested in continuing, that availability essentially by helping to fund the program. So I wasn't, I understood, I think when I asked the question, I said I understood state law doesn't allow us to charge for these things. I don't think it's a matter of you don't just send somebody a bill you don't have an agreement with. But I understood that there'd be some conversation, at least with other municipalities, that says, we offer this, we're not obligated, for instance, to offer adult education. Falmouth doesn't have an adult education program, as I understand it. They put their education dollars into their K-12, program. We do have it, and it's a huge value in our community for a lot of people. So I'm just curious how we are working with our neighbors to ensure that when their residents take advantage of that valuable resource, that they're helping to also fund that program, especially if we continue to have a wait list for some of our own residents, if we're, in other words, not able to meet our own needs within the community. But it sounds like those conversations have not happened. And we were also providing free consulting to South Portland and Westbrook, as I remember it, in helping them set up their own programs. I think I remember that being discussed last year, that we were consulting with them to help them in establishing some adult ed programs or English language programs, and I'm wondering if we're still providing that service.
Westford has a fairly robust adult ed program already, and they're dealing with the same thing. They can't meet the needs of all of the people that are going there. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, Actually, yes, February.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know specifically where we are with the consulting arrangements with
Okay.
those municipalities. We'll get you an answer to that. And I can tell you that we've not had specific conversations with any of those communities about, would you want to pay for the residents that come for art classes?
Do we have the estimates on the percentage? I know it's not very high, but,
I think we did that last year, so we can redo it. this
yeah,
year.
just to have a sense. Thank you.
Thanks.
If I can raise an issue to make the city aware of and maybe talk about next steps, which is right now our community centers are paying the full energy costs. The schools with community centers, the school district is paying, we are paying the full costs, energy costs of running those community centers, despite the fact that the city is actually running and billing for use of the community centers and so forth. So for instance, we're at Wright Key and Riverton, we're paying to keep those pools. When you look at our energy costs, they are significantly elevated at those, at the schools with community centers. And that have, and so we don't have the full data yet, and Alicia can explain a little bit more, but perhaps a very rudimentary back of the envelope analysis is that we're shouldering maybe $250,000 in energy costs to run the communities, and energy costs for the community centers. So it, I think, would be worth talking about how to more appropriately redirect those costs so that the school district isn't shouldering that burden, which is actually a city-run service.
I think that's a fair question. I would look to staff to try to gather the data on both the school and the city. And, I wouldn't want to say tonight how we would look through that, but I would want staff to meet and, try to get on the same page about it. I suspect there are a host of, maybe not large ticket items like pools, but there may be other things where perhaps the cost should be looked at more closely to make sure that whatever the cost sharing is appropriate. I don't know that we can do that really quickly, but I would look to staff to take a look at that, see how you could work and come back to us at some point. Jill, I'm sorry.
Hi, it was just an important piece of information that might be helpful to pull at the same time is the several rounds of investments in public buildings that have been paid for as a system, as a city, to lower the energy cost in public buildings, including the schools.
We've put a lot into that over the last several years.
Yeah, so I think it would be important to pull that information as well. I don't think those were sheer costs. They were great projects to improve our energy efficiency and lower our energy cost and footprint citywide.
I'm not sure I'm exactly sure what you're...
It's an investment that would be interesting to look at the same time that we're looking at the expense.
To quantify how much the city has paid that has not gone through like district CIP or something along those lines to realize energy efficiency.
Okay.
I just think it's an important piece of data to have, and looking at it all at once helps us hold our own feet to the fire around energy efficiency.
Just on this same vein, if we're going to go down this path, I think we should also look at athletic fields and sports facilities that are shared and how those get.
So we pay maintenance fees and we pay to rent the facilities, so.
Again, I'm just adding this into the discussion. I'm not presupposing an answer.
Justin and then Joe.
I'll just chime in quickly on this if I can. I would echo what Nick said, if staff want to figure this out. To me, this is another in the list of things that we all work on this together. This is, to me, an accounting entry. This is a complete hold harmless. We shift costs from you to us. I'm not gonna give you credit for cost savings. If we shift costs to you, I'm not gonna blame you for cost increases. To me, that's a management thing. It's like we would put the crossing guards back to you guys because it's ridiculous that you would call the city manager's office to figure out how to cross the street to get your kid to school kind of thing. I'll just leave that.
Just ditto.
Yeah, I think it just is something that as we've been reviewing the budget, it came up as like maybe, time to, because these things can go on for a long time and, things change, and so it might just be a good time for us all to take a good look at all those things and see what's appropriate.
Absolutely.
Anybody else?
I have one question, and it's just, I don't want to take us down a path with this. Because we got to wrap up, so I'll just put that out there. And Brendan, it's to you, and I don't know if you have this information. I just think, for contextual purposes, and if you don't have it, fine, you can get it for us. But one thing we use kind of, it doesn't deal directly with our budget or your budget, but one thing that we use as an indicator of how the local economy is doing, and how we see things trending, is excise tax and excise tax collection. And the last few years, or several years, it's been robust. Is that something you could get for us?
Yeah.
Or if you know it off, or generally, I don't know.
Yeah, so, well, we have seen an increase in the past couple of budget years between $300,000 to $400,000 per year, but it started to flatten out and then decrease this year. We're budgeting for a $400,000 decrease in this year's budget. Typically, excise tax tends to taper off a little bit slower because the car dealers will add incentives, so people will keep buying even after the economy slows down. But, yeah, the last time we saw a dip was 2007 to 2009 timeframe when it was an economic downturn.
And again, I don't want to, I only raised that, we haven't seen the city manager's budget yet, we don't know what that looks like.
Are you trying to tell me to register my scooter? Because I did forget.
Yeah, we could use every, are you past the date?
I think I am. No, I'm
But I just, in terms of the, just kind of general, everybody's got an opinion, I'm sure, on the economy, and interest rates and all those things, but that's kind of our local barometer. So I just, thanks for that. I didn't know if you had it here.
Randy Billings actually asked that question. So.
He did, so you were really prepared for it, huh? That was all I had. It's really a general.
Just to wrap, I guess, so we come together next Thursday, the 4th.
I wanted to discuss that date. We hadn't really discussed it as a group. I had confirmed separately that it worked with
It works for me.
your calendar. I think Council Cox, you mentioned potentially could work for you.
Whatever I wrote on that doodle poll. Yeah, 4th is good.
Because I was to say we need, by charter, we need to make sure we've had 2 meetings, so I think whatever I can do with my schedule, we can have that.
Yeah, and it's been a challenge scheduling. But just so people are aware, our committee is scheduled to vote this out tomorrow in a meeting. So when we come back to meet as a joint finance committee at that point, assuming everything goes as planned, it'll be the board's budget.
That's fine. Great, but thank you for.
No, it would be the
It wouldn't be the
finance
board
committee.
school
It would be
budget.
the school board finance committee budget because we don't vote. We're scheduled to vote as a board on
That's true. So
It'll be finance.
it'll be in front of the board, but it will be out of.
You guys will have made a recommendation.
Right, yes, yeah.
Gotcha. Well, we have another agenda item that we've added. You guys are welcome to stay and listen to. I'm not sure you want to join us, given that we've been here for 3 hours. But so we have one more item that the city's going to chat about briefly. It's not an action item, it's something that came up recently. So thank you all for spending your time with us and for getting some more information. Thank you. Thanks very much.